speaker is Cllr Mick, Socialist Party, who has come from Cork to speak with us.
Okay. And I'd like to start by thanking the organisers for the invitation. It's always nice to speak at a meeting in Limerick. And the government are coming back next week from their long summer holidays. And in the one hand, they have the Board Stiff Newer report and the NAMA legislation. And in the other hand, they have the Lisbon Treaty, right? And they are two sides of the one coin, because the agenda in both is the same. It is to benefit the interests of big business and a corporate elite at the expense of working class people and at the expense of middle class people within society. NAMA is straightforward. You have 50 or 60 or 70 billion euro worth of European Central Bank bonds being handed over to the banks at the same time as they are planning 3,000 million euro worth of cutbacks in health, education, social welfare and services. I'm talking about water charges, property taxes, taxation of child benefit, and so on and so forth. Now, is the Lisbon agenda the same? I would argue absolutely that it is. Let's have a look at it. Let's start by looking at a few court cases. These aren't court cases down at the district court across the way. These are court cases in what is fast becoming the de facto Supreme Court of Europe, the European Court of Justice. Some of you will have heard of the Viking case, the Laval case, the Rupert case. Some of you may not. I'll talk about them in a minute. But I want to talk about the case that is probably least well known, the Luxembourg case. Now, we voted last June and voted no to Lisbon. 1 week after the Irish people voted no to Lisbon, this hugely important case was heard in front of the European Court of Justice. The case was brought by the European Commission, and it was brought against the state of Luxembourg, and in particular some of the national labour laws that pertained to the rights of migrant workers and foreign workers whilst working in the state of Luxembourg under the Posting of Workers Directive. Now, what kind of rights were we talking about for migrant workers? Well, let's look at a few of them. Number one, a migrant worker in Luxembourg, as a Luxembourg worker themselves, was entitled to a written contract from their employer or its equivalent. They were entitled to a cost of living indexation, so that if prices went up, their wages went up. And they were entitled to a situation where if the state asked their employer to provide papers and documentation to show that the labour standards were being adhered to, that they would be provided. Right? And other things besides. The European Court of Justice overturned that and said that the labour laws in Luxembourg were out of order and went too far in all respects. They said that the responsibility for the written contract applied back home rather than in Luxembourg itself. They noted in their judgment that the indexation of wages applied to all wages, not just the lower end of the scale around the minimum wage, and said that Luxembourg had failed to establish that a serious threat to a fundamental interest of society was at stake in this regard. And they said that the specification that the company that was posting workers into Luxembourg had to provide documents to monitors of labour standards in advance, that the legal situation was not sufficiently clear and represented an obstacle to cross-border service provision.